Hello, welcome to the Bookcast Club, a bookish podcast for people who love to chat books. Today you have me, Sarah, coming to you from the Netherlands.
Me, Alice, coming to you from London.
And me, Jenny, coming to you from Norwich.
Today, as usual, we will have a bit of a chat about the books that we're currently reading, and then for this episode, Jenny and I have read some of Alice's favourite books, which we will discuss. They are The Time Traveller's Wife and The Poisonwood Bible. There will be timestamps for these in the show notes if your podcast allows them. If you're a new listener, first of all, welcome. And second of all, just for a bit of background information, this is the third episode in a series in this podcast in which we read each other's favourite books. In the first one, we discuss some of my favourites, and in the second one, we discuss some of Sarah T's. Sarah T being an old host of the podcast. In my episode, we discuss at length The Secret History by Donna Tartt and Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, which are two books that we actually refer to quite a lot in this podcast. So if you want to catch up on some Bookcast Club lore, that is a really good episode to listen to. That will be linked in the show notes. And it's also the reason why we're not discussing The Secret History today. Right, Alice?
Yes, I would like to kick off by saying that The Time Traveller's Wife and The Poisonwood Bible are actually not my top two favourite books. My top two favourite books are The Secret History and A Little Life. And I was banned by Jenny from having A Little Life as one of my options, and Sarah stole The Secret History. So we've gone on to two of my other top five, and let's go from there.
I can even confess that when we decided that we would do this series, I was like, oh, guys, I'll kick off, because I knew that we would have a little Donna Tartt off.
Oh, charming.
I know. I wouldn't mind. I actually haven't read anything by Hanya Yanagihara, and I would like to. So I wouldn't even mind doing an episode about her or something, if you wanted to in the future, Alice.
I would love that, because I've got To Paradise just hanging out on my bedside table at the moment, because I'm slightly scared to read it because of how much I love A Little Life. I'm concerned that I might not love To Paradise anywhere near as much, and I don't really want to start it. So, yeah.
People I watched that loved A Little Life also seem to quite enjoy her new one, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I want to read all of them. The People in the Trees is that what it's called? The People in the Trees?
Yes.
Also sounds really like right up my street, and it's very short. So
that's why Alice is banned, mainly because I wasn't going to read a however many page book it was again.
I was willing to for Alice.
Well, thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that.
Anyway, so that's what we're not doing this episode, but maybe we'll do that in the future, because that actually sounds like a fun idea. Mm-hmm. So, Alice, what are you reading at the moment? Give us a bit of a reading update, if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, I've been having the biggest reading slump of my life, to be honest. I did not pick a book up for an entire month. Did not pick anything up, didn't listen to anything, genuinely just couldn't get my head around it. And I think part of this was because we had 4 consecutive weekends where we had guests staying, and then the 5th we were away, and I was just like, I just don't have time for this, because all of my time was spent like basically running a bed and breakfast, which was
yeah, I was about to say washing sheets and trying to dry them.
Yeah, thank God it was when the weather was really nice, is because then all of the sheets could go outside, because we've got a garden now. And yeah, it was not a particularly conducive time for reading. It was very much a case of work, change some sheets, watch some TV and fall asleep. So I did, however, on Wednesday or Thursday of last week, pick up Elena Farrante's My Brilliant Friend, which is the first in her Neapolitan novel series. I think there are 4 in the series, and they tell the story of Elena is one of the main characters, and I'm going to pronounce it Lila. I think it's Lila rather than Lila, but apologies if I'm saying that wrong. So it tells the story of Elena and Lila, who are best friends, frenemies, growing up in Naples, or in the outskirts of Naples, in the 1950s and 60s. So the first book kind of covers their sort of childhood, adolescence, and kind of touch in their young adulthood, and the books kind of go on from there. And it's one of the most incredible descriptions of female friendship that I've ever read. It really goes into detail around the rivalry that comes with kind of having a really close friend who's good at stuff that maybe you're not quite so good at, or who gets the things that you want and you're not kind of finding your way how to get there. It's brilliantly written, so descriptive, and has got the most incredible cast of characters that you really, really feel like you're part of this group of people living in the outskirts of Naples, even if you've probably never been there. And it's an absolute sensation. I'm sure most people listening have at least heard of it, if not read it. There's also a TV series, which I think is on Amazon Prime. But it's just fantastic. I can absolutely see why there's been so much hype. But my favourite thing about it is that nobody knows who Elena Farrante is. It's a pen name, and nobody has been able to work it out. There's been like rumours left, right and centre about it, but there's no confirmation around who she is. And I really love that, because I feel like that doesn't happen very often, does it?
Like Banksy.
Yeah, like Banksy.
I was going to say like Daft Punk. So.
That too.
All that.
Good pop culture references here. But yeah, I am loving it. Have either of you read it, or any of the series?
No.
I read it a long time ago, and I found it a little bit boring actually, so I didn't quite finish it. But I don't know. I couldn't say for sure that it was like definitely the book. It might have just been that I wasn't really in the mood for because it's quite introspective from memory.
It is.
It's not a super plot focused book, so yeah, at the time I found it a little bit boring, but I certainly wouldn't stand by that necessarily.
Do you know what though? It's really interesting that you say that, because when I picked it off my bookshelf, I found a bookmark about 20 pages into it. So clearly at some point I picked this up, had tried to read it and not got anywhere with it. So maybe it's one that you have to be in the right frame of mind for. And I've had quite a lot of time to read over the last few days, because it's been the Easter bank holiday weekend. I've had some extra time off from work. So that might be what's helped me plough through it.
Yeah, always the way with those kind of books, isn't it? You've got to really be in the right headspace, otherwise you're just like...
Yeah, exactly. What about you, Jenny? What have you been reading?
Well, I've been reading your favourite books, because your favourite books are beasties.
Sorry about that. And these are probably some of the shorter ones, aren't they? With A Little Life, The Secret History is probably about the same.
A Little Life, yeah. But even The Time Traveler's Wife is 500 pages long, so it's not short. But I'm going to start a new book tonight, and it's one I've recently purchased. It's a new release. I don't know where I originally saw it, but I kept seeing it, and it's Woman Eating by Claire Kohda. Have you seen this?
No.
It's, well, I think it's either my dirty mind or that's a slightly suggestive apple on the front.
That's your dirty mind, I think.
That's your dirty mind. To me it looks like a lung.
Well, I think it looks like a testicle.
What? Oh
well, I don't know. Well, I'll read it and find out if that's a testicle or not, and I'll prove you all wrong. But it's vampire fiction.
Of course it is.
But I'm not usually a fan of vampires. But this one is about a young woman. I think she's living in London and interning at an art gallery, and she's trying not to consume blood. I feel like this story's been done elsewhere, but she's trying to not consume human blood, but is presumably getting the urge to. And finding pig's blood hard to track down. So yeah, I'll read you the last little paragraph of the blurb, because it doesn't really give that much away. But it says, if Lydia is to find a way to exist in the world, she must reconcile the conflicts within her between her demon and human sides, her mixed ethnic heritage, and her relationship with food, and in turn humans. Before any of this, however, she must eat. And then it's blurbed by Ruth Ozeki. So she says, absolutely brilliant. Claire Kohda takes the vampire trope and makes it her own. And then I think the BBC have blurbed on the back as well. So a modern-day vampire thriller that also covers race, social isolation, unrequited love, and parental loyalty. So I don't normally like vampire fiction because of the tropes in them. But if this is different... And I kept seeing it, and I had a voucher, and I thought, I want to read that book with a testicle on the front.
Sure, of course you do.
Sounds interesting.
It sounds very interesting.
It's quite short. It's a debut. I think she's a musician. She's a writer and a musician.
Claire Kohda. The name does ring a bell, but I can't think why.
So it's short, big font, lovely.
Nice palate cleanser after my chunky books.
Hopefully.
Look forward to hearing your thoughts on that, Jen. Interesting. I just finished Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, which I think I mentioned I was reading in the last episode. It's a non-fiction book about mushrooms. It's that one that's won like every non-fiction award in the past like year.
I've bought it for quite a few people as gifts as well. I've not read it myself, but I've just been like, this looks great and really up people's street.
Yeah, my mum's got it. I think
People are
my sister
loving
bought
it.
it for
Yeah,
her.
so it's all about the world of mushrooms, the wonderful world of mushrooms, really. And he's talking about, so he's a mushroom biologist, I guess. I think he's got a special name for himself. But
Mycologist.
mycologist, thank you. Have you read the blurb, Alice?
No, I've just done mushroom foraging before, and that's mycology. And yeah, the study of mushrooms is mycology.
And Beatrix Potter was a mycologist too.
Was she?
Yeah, she's mentioned in it,
Oh, there you go.
and some of
Didn't know
her
that.
mushroom discoveries, which are pretty interesting.
She's cool.
Yeah. So it's sort of in two halves, kind of. For the first half is really about how mushrooms grow, how they communicate with each other, some sort of mushroom biology, which I thought was I found really, really interesting, especially about how they communicate and how they kind of grow as networks. That was really, really good. And he actually likens the mushroom networks to the brain quite a lot. So I obviously really like that. I'm a neuroscientist, so I found that really enjoyable. The second half is little bit more into sort of like, quite a lot of nonfiction books can get into like a bit of a self-indulgent philosophical discussion towards the end. It really did that. So the second half I found was a little rambly and long. Yeah, which I was a little bit surprised actually, because it's won so many awards, and I think it really would have benefited from an editor saying like, okay, Merlin, love what you've got here. Let's make it a little bit tighter. Yeah, I enjoyed it, but yeah, I think it really, really needed a bit of an edit, I think. The bit that I enjoyed the most was about mushroom communication, and also he talked a lot about psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and how they work and why they work and stuff, which I found really, really interesting. So, yeah, enjoyed.
It does sound good. And yeah, I do think I agree with you on a lot of nonfiction really needing. I think a lot of them could probably really benefit from a fiction editor, because I think they are probably in publishing houses kept really separate. And actually, I just think that cross-pollination would probably be really helpful to make them a bit punchier if they're going for that popular nonfiction niche. Obviously, if you're going to write like a history book for history students, you don't really need to worry about that. But if you're writing a popular history nonfiction, you do. And same obviously with any nonfiction topic.
Yeah, totally. Good point. Because the second half he talks quite a lot about what mushrooms could do for the environment, how we could use them, our relationship with mushrooms, and if someone had sat him down and sort of said, okay, what's the story here? Like, what's the message?
Exactly.
That would have been really helpful, I think. So yeah, add a bit more storytelling, I think, in nonfiction.
Yeah, exactly.
This is where we take a little break to tell you about all the different ways you can support the podcast, some of which are totally free. A really effective and easy way of showing your support is by rating and reviewing us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. There is a link in the show notes that will take you straight to the Apple Podcast page where you can write a review. And if you listen on Spotify, you can now very easily give us a star rating. You can also share our posts on social media. We're at Bookcast Club on both Instagram and Twitter. You can sign up to our free monthly newsletter where we share even more book recommendations and all the latest podcast news. But the best way for us to find new listeners is by you telling your book loving friends and family about us. If you want to support the podcast financially, we do have a Patreon account. You can sign up for as little as £2 a month. We offer early access to the podcast, monthly bonus episodes, and our top tier will get you all of the above and personalised book recommendations. We get you to fill in a survey and then we tailor our book recommendations to your preferences. We will also send you books in the post. There are over 15 bonus episodes you can get instant access to if you sign up as a patron today. The link is in our show notes. But however you choose to show your support, we as always want to say a huge thank you. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners.
So now we're going to talk about my favourite books. So firstly, we're going to talk about The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, which I'm never sure if I say properly. I think it's said fairly phonetically, but we're going to go with Audrey Niffenegger for this. If you've not read The Time Traveller's Wife, it is the story of Claire and Henry, who have known each other since Claire was 6 and Henry was 36, and were married when Claire was 23 and Henry was 31. This is because Henry is one of the first people diagnosed with a disorder where he is pulled in and out of time in his own life. This means that basically periodically his genetic clock resets and he finds himself misplaced in time, forwards or backwards, and is pulled to moments particularly of emotional gravity in his life, past and future. His disappearances are spontaneous, his experiences unpredictable, and they are alternatingly harrowing and amusing. The Time Traveller's Wife, it depicts the effects of time travel on Henry and Claire's marriage and their love for one another as the story unfolds from both points of view. They attempt to live normal lives, pursuing familiar goals, steady jobs, good friends, children of their own, and all of this is threatened by something they can neither prevent nor control, making their story intensely moving and entirely unforgettable, in my opinion, and also that of Goodreads. So, what did you guys think?
Well, I read this many years ago, I think when I was like 17 or something, and then I reread it a couple of months ago in preparation for this episode, and I actually liked it a lot more the second time. The first time, for some reason, I remember when I first read it, I was frustrated that Claire didn't have a choice, which is kind of a dumb, I don't know why I read that, because as I'm reading it the second time, I was like, oh, neither of them have a choice. So it was a lot more balanced than it was in my memory. So if you had asked me about this book a few months ago, I would have said that I found it to be a little bit unfair in like how their fates are determined. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's a really interesting book to read, especially because it jumps around quite a lot between their different ages. And so in some parts of it, like Claire will be really young and Henry will be really old and he'll know all about her and she won't know anything about him. In other situations, it's reversed. So she will know him really well. He won't know her. And I found that to be such an interesting dynamic, actually. And it really is thought-provoking to think about how much they were sort of destined to be together, how much control they each had, because neither of them really had a choice. Because when Claire first meets Henry, he knows everything about her and he's like, oh, you're my wife, basically. And sort of the opposite happens when he first meets her. So it was a bit of it's a really interesting book, I think.
Yeah, I really like the concept of time travel and the way that the concept of time travel is described in this book. And I like, exactly as you say, that they both get put in that position where they've got no idea what's going on, and it's not one of them is choosing to do this to the other. It's completely foretold almost. And I really like the concept of free will and determinism that comes up quite a lot throughout the book. It's quite a core theme, really. And at one point there's a list of dates through Claire's childhood when Henry will appear, and it's referenced in the book that neither of them are really sure how this list can even exist. It's almost like a Mobius strip, because Henry tells Claire these dates, Claire writes them down and then gives that notebook to Henry when they meet in real time. So it's foretold. It's really interesting to kind of think whether the way we're going to live our lives and the way each day is going to unfold is already told or not. And I quite liked that. What did you think, Jenny?
Well, in all honesty, I'm not going to finish it. I'm halfway through. I've given it a good shot. I messaged Sarah about a week ago being like, am I allowed to DNF the time travelers? She's like, read a bit more. My issues with it, I can appreciate what you're both saying, but actually I think those are kind of the reasons why I found it frustrating. So she clearly is very aware of her timeline and of her plot, and I think it's done really well, but I found it confusing, and I think once something starts irritating me, I lose patience for it, and unfortunately I had that. It had that feeling, hasn't gone away. I would say that I am halfway through, and I feel like I'm at the point where there's things happening in sort of Claire's adult life now that I'm getting more out of, whereas a lot of the start of it is her as a child, her as a teenager, and we'll probably get onto this, but I found some of it quite uncomfortable reading, and unfortunately I just think there wasn't something that I could find. I couldn't let those things go. And halfway through, and I think I'm gonna stop.
That's fair. I mean, I read this for the first time. I was just looking at when it was first published, which was 2003. I think I read it for the first time when I was about 14 or 15, so only I think when it first came out in paperback. And I think that probably meant that there was some bits of it that I could gloss over a little bit more easily, because I was so young, and then on returning to them as an adult, I've been like, oh yeah, that's a bit weird, or that's a bit more challenging to go through or to read. I've never found the timeline confusing though, because it does more or less, not completely, but more or less go in Claire's timeline. So the beginning of the book is a little bit out of time, and then it goes to Henry's childhood, and then to Claire's childhood, and then to where they meet in real time. And that's, I think once you kind of click into that, it becomes a little bit easier to follow where you are. But
yeah, and I think I've got to that point because I think that's what we're trying not to give spoilers away, but there's a Christmas that they spend together with her family, and that's kind of what I've just read, and I feel like it is getting into its flow.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to hear that you read it when you were a teenager, because the bits that I struggled to look past are the bits when he's an adult. Not so much when she's a very young child, because she's, what is she? She's 6 and he's
36.
What, in his 30s?
Yeah.
It's when she's a teenager, not a really young teenager, but maybe she's like 16 or 15 or 16, and references to his sexual desires start happening. They just made me really uncomfortable. And I know he's time traveling. I get that they've met as adults. They have a consensual relationship when they're adults. But unfortunately, those bits still read like a man grooming a teenager. And I did find it, quite uncomfortable.
I actually found that less uncomfortable the second time than I did the first time. So I don't know, maybe my moral compass has slipped in the last 10 years. But yeah, I remember the first time I found it really uncomfortable. This time that's kind of what I was referring to before when I was talking about balance. That's one of the ways that I found it actually a little bit more balanced than I did the first time, because there are points in which she does have this kind of position of power over him. So it is uncomfortable. However, the dynamic does shift, which I think is what for me makes it gets a little bit of a pass, because when he meets her when he's quite young, it's never for them a point where she's much older than him, but when he initially meets her, she has all the cards basically because she knows everything that's going on. So I think for that, for me, it didn't make me too uncomfortable. Although I appreciate it does. For some people, obviously, it will be something they don't want to read. Read the timelines. I actually listened to the audiobook of it this time. They actually are narrated. Claire and Henry are narrated by different people, and so I found it really, really clear. So if people are into audiobooks, it's a really good way to read it. And I actually listened to it. I was on a really, really long train journey, so I listened to it for like 8 hours straight. And I was just like completely absorbed by it. It was because the chapters are really short, so it's quite pacey, even though it's quite long.
Good. Oh no, I'll have to give the audiobook a listen actually. I also, one of the things I really like, but it's also quite a challenging thing, is the fact that we find out a bit more about Henry has a life without Claire, right? But Claire doesn't have a life without Henry. And I quite liked that concept in it. But it also kind of goes back to what you're saying around the fact that it's a bit imbalanced and she doesn't get a say and she doesn't get anything, because the relationship between Henry and Ingrid is really interesting as well, and how she can't deal with it, or he isn't a nice person to anybody but Claire. And I think that was really interesting. But I don't know, what did you guys think?
Yeah, so Ingrid is Henry's ex-girlfriend that he is dating before he knows Claire. Yeah, I really felt for Ingrid as a character. She is really treated poorly by Henry.
She is.
And she really suffers a great deal. And I really, really felt for her. I actually found her really interesting. I wish we had heard a bit more from her, because we only get a couple of scenes with Ingrid.
Me too.
So yeah, I really felt bad for Ingrid, and I didn't like Henry that much, although I liked reading from his perspective as a person. I didn't really like him.
I didn't like him.
No. And he's just such an asshole,
Yeah.
especially to Ingrid. And yeah, I wish Claire, because there are a couple, won't be specific because it is quite specific to the plot, but there are a few situations in which Claire sort of doesn't get that aspect of her life, where she doesn't get like a young love that doesn't work out because she always has Henry. So yeah, I do wish that had happened in a way for Claire as well, because he's sort of, I guess he can be a bit more sure of Claire because it's not his first relationship, but for her it is always Henry.
It's all she's known, exactly. And there's a point fairly early on in her teenage years where she references the fact that she suddenly realizes that not everybody has a Henry, and that she says to him, "You're making me different. You're making me completely different to everybody else. Nobody else has this. Nobody else gets this." And I think it's quite important that that was referenced, because if it hadn't been, the idea that she'd just be going through life being like, "Oh yeah, well everything's just fine and everything's just foretold for me," would be, I think I'd find that would have found that a lot more challenging.
Well, hearing you two talking about this, because obviously I haven't read the whole thing, but it does still make me think of relationships between an older man and a younger woman and the dynamics involved there, and these must all be thoughts that go through family members' minds actually, as to whether somebody's childhood or their innocence has been stolen, and whether they've, you know, not had the opportunities and not had the life experiences that maybe they might have wanted for that person. I think just finding this whole conversation really interesting, actually. So I might not have enjoyed the book, but I'm enjoying the conversation it's generating.
I think there's an age difference between them in real time, isn't there? She's actually 7 years.
I think it's 8 years. And they meet when she's actually in real time, when she's actually quite young. She's only, I think, 21. No, she's not even 21.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's 28, I think, when they meet.
Yeah, so she must be 20, and that's really young. Actually, the older I get, I remember when I was 20, I thought I knew everything, and I thought I was really grown up, and I wasn't. I was so young, and I look back at even things I did when I was 24, and I'm like, oh, I was such an idiot, and I was so young, and the way that person behaved was not okay, and that kind of thing, which isn't something that really comes up in the book, obviously, because she just knows it'll all work out. But it's
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, as also for me, if I think back at the kind of people that I would be dating when I was 20, I'm like, thank God that I've moved on from that. Thank God I'm not in that position.
Yeah. And I know that's not the case for everybody. I know, because you and Ben met when you were kind of in your early 20s, didn't you, Jenny?
Yeah, earlier, 18.
18.
Together when we were 19.
But then I guess the fact that you were the same age probably made that different, because...
Well, I'm slightly older than him.
But, you know, you were at the same stage in life. It's not like you were kind of, 12 years older.
No, we were the same year in school, so...
Maybe Alice and I just...
Let's not finish that sentence. But I also really like how the family relationships play out in the book. It's something that I've come back to more as I've got older. So the relationship that Claire has with her mother in particular is explored, not in a great deal of depth, but it comes up quite a lot. And the relationship that Henry has with his father is very detailed. Because, and this isn't a spoiler because it happens at the beginning of the book, Henry's mother dies when he is 5 or 6.
In a car accident?
In a car accident, yeah. And that's around the time that he finds out that he can time travel. It's all very interlinked, and, you know, the relationship he has with his father after that is really challenging, and they don't get along, and, you know, they come back together at various points and they drift apart at other points, and I think that probably affects how Henry treats people as well. Not to go all pop psychology on this, but it has to, right?
Yeah, and he's also obsessed with his mother and the way that she died and when she died, and he goes back to that point constantly.
He watches
I think
it a lot, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah. There's a really beautiful line in the book actually where he says, if you were to watch that scene as an observer, the scene where she dies, I'm everywhere. I'm on the road slowing people down. I'm calling the police from a phone box. I'm comforting a child by the side of the road, because he goes back there like again and again.
And that is really beautiful. I think, to my mind, Henry's relationship with Claire when she's a child really affects her relationship with her parents, because she has this older figure in her life, and there's a point in the book where Claire finds some poetry her mother has written, and there's a line in it that says, Claire, who was never mine, because, you know, she met this guy when she was 6. He affects everything about her life, everything about her childhood, and she goes off and spends all of her time on her own in the meadow behind their house, as far as they're concerned, alone. And that's got to really shape your relationship with your family, doesn't it?
Because I was getting vibes from this book, I went and looked at some reviews, and part of the reason that I've decided not to continue with it is because I know that there are some really quite sad events coming up in it, and I'm not enjoying it, and I don't need to read those. So I think I'm going to stop at a good point.
I will say this isn't a spoiler, but maybe more of a content warning, that there is discussion of miscarriages, of suicide, of quite severe injuries, of cancer. Lots of stuff goes on in the book.
Can I tell you my biggest issue with the book?
Of course.
The sexy times in it.
Sex is a big plot point throughout the book.
Of course.
But it's really bad. It's really bad sex. It's really badly written sex. I'm sorry, Audrey, if you ever listen to this. I apologise for what I'm about to do.
Are you going to
read some of it?
No, Jen, I feel like if you read a sex scene out of context on any book, it's always going to sound bad.
Yeah.
To be fair. Sorry, Alice, I'll cut it out.
That's all right. I'm very intrigued as to what she's going to say.
We fuck carefully, silently. When I finally come, it's so intense I get a horrible headache, and for a minute I'm afraid I'm going to disappear, but I don't. Instead, I lie in Claire's arms, cross-eyed with pain. There you go. I'll stop there. I have issues with sex scenes. Either I feel like you've got to go for it, or just allude to it. Don't half-heartedly attempt it, or write something you think is sexy that is just quite cringy. I don't know. But there's also a whole bit where they discuss whether they have too much sex, and
that bit's weird.
and he's like, she sounds quite uncomfortable, and it's like, do we have too much sex? He's like, no, I'd have sex all the time. I just thought, I just can't be bothered. That's one of the last things I read and thought, no, we're done here.
Oh, there's some really good bits after that.
Are they sexy though?
No, there's some really good bits in the book that are after that. I mean, like, I completely understand and respect that you don't want to carry on with it, and I think that's very fair. The bit where they get married is brilliant. I love that bit.
Yeah, it is funny when they get married. I will just say that the ending, which we won't talk about, I really didn't like it though. I'll just say that parts of the ending I found a little contrived and convenient, let's say.
And I would agree. And I think the very, very end of it, just to kind of gear everybody up for it, is not how I would have wanted the book to end. And it wound me up. It really wound me up, because I just thought it's a really strange way to end the book. But it's good. I mean, obviously I love it. It's one this is probably the book that I've read the most number of times. And I think this is the only book that I've ever read and finished and started reading again. But as I say, I read it first when I was like 15, so I had all the time in the world to do that. So Jenny, what would your star rating be?
Probably a 3.
Okay.
If I was going to go on to finish it. I didn't hate it. I just, I'm just slightly, don't really see the point of it.
Don't really see the point of it. Sarah, what would your rating be?
I'd give it a 4.
I would also recommend that you don't let your 15-year-olds read it.
Yeah, it's definitely an adult book, I would say, because some of the issues about consent and stuff are a little bit, especially just because it's a bit of an older book, so it's probably not the best messaging for a teenager, I would say. Sweet. So let's move on to the Poisonwood Bible, shall we?
Yes. So book 2 is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, which is a story told by the wife and 4 daughters of a evangelical Baptist minister called Nathan, who takes his family and goes on a mission to the Belgian Congo in the late 1950s. At the start of the book, they arrive in the Congo carrying everything they think they will need with them, only to find, of course, as you would, that nothing that they think they will need is completely appropriate. And the book is about their undoing and reconnection, based predominantly off the beginning of what happens by starting in this mission in the Congo. So the book's obviously had an incredibly positive reception and was selected for Oprah's Book Club in 1999 and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction in that year as well. She's brilliant. But what did you think?
I enjoyed this one. I liked how epic it was. I liked how complex it was. I'm a big fan of a character-driven book. And I mean, it's pretty much pure character driven, really. Like 5 different characters, and I just loved how much you got to know each of the women in this family. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's big and it's complex, and I listened to the audio and I listened to it quite quickly because it's a big book, and I was aware that I needed to get it finished for this episode. I wish I'd read the physical copy, and I wish I'd taken my time over it. So, I don't reread, but maybe if I ever do, I would pick up the physical book and take my time over it. I think it deserved that. But yeah, no, I enjoyed it.
So this is another one that I had read before as well. I read it a couple of years ago, and I also reread it. So the first time I read it, I really liked it, and this time I loved it. I really, really, really enjoyed this. I loved the second time around because I understood the sort of overall picture a little bit better. I was able to appreciate the structure and the storytelling of it a lot more because as Jenny was saying, it's quite character focused, which I really, really like, and it's very female focused as well, which I love. So the 5 main characters are all women. And the first time around, I remember I spent a lot of time trying to distinguish the 5 characters, especially because at the beginning, 4 of the characters are the children of this family. And because they're quite young at the beginning, it takes a little while for their voices to kind of distinguish themselves. So I remember the first time I read it, maybe even the first half, I was sort of just trying to sort of figure out exactly who was who. And this time, because I had a bit of a leg up, I didn't need to do that really. So I just loved it. It's beautifully written, really exquisite writing actually. The prose is just outstanding. And the structure of it is so interesting, how she plays with position and how she plays with linearity. She goes back at some points and redoes scenes from different characters' perspectives. She jumps around, she jumps forward and backward, and I just thought it was, really, really wonderful. Loved it.
Good.
It's another one that you talking about being able to distinguish the different characters. I found it really hard on audio to start with. I don't think it's the best audiobook, actually. I don't think it's brilliantly narrated, whatever version you can get in the UK. She just uses the same voice for every single character, and it's all the same. Like, intonation's the same, everything's the same. So it took me a long time because I had to learn whose names were who, and rather than get a sense of who the person was from the reading of it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend people start with the physical copy and then do the audio.
I think especially the first half when I was reading it, I think almost every chapter I would just flick back and be like, oh, who was this again? Just to sort of...
I did the same. Because the 4 sisters in particular, well, 2 of them are twins. That doesn't really help. Yeah, so the 4 daughters are Rachel, Leah, Ada and Ruth May. Rachel is the eldest, Leah and Ada are the twins, and Ruth May is quite a bit younger. So I think I find her a little bit easier to distinguish the first time I read it. But the top 3, well, actually the twins in particular, were really hard to distinguish. I always found Rachel really funny, though. She adds some real comic relief to the book because she's... So the family are originally from Georgia, this US state, and Rachel is very much a kind of archetypal Georgia peach, very much interested in her appearance and literally cannot think of anything worse than leaving kind of her school and her friends and her popularity behind. The younger girls are all a bit more interested in the adventure, but Rachel I did always find her incredibly funny. I don't know what you thought though.
She probably is in there as light relief, isn't she? Because it is quite a heavy book. Yeah, I think she does that character well.
Yeah, I think she's an interesting character because you want to hate her because sometimes she can be, she's so self-absorbed and makes kind of like sarcastic remarks to herself about how everyone looks and stuff. But I mean, she's a 16-year-old girl, you have to, it's funny how sympathetic she is, even though she's actually quite annoying. She's, even all the way through, like towards the end, her character kind of develops in a really interesting way. And even towards the end, even though she's so infuriating as a person and she makes all these like funny quips, and because she's quite deprecating about her sisters and stuff the whole way through, and even though she's quite awful at the end, I think she's so sympathetic as a character. Like, you really feel like you can understand her, I think, even though she's such an asshole.
Yeah, exactly. You can really understand where she's coming from, to be honest. And light relief, but she's useful light relief. It's not just thrown in there for the shits and giggles, basically.
Barbara Kingsolver is quite the writer to make these characters sympathetic, because particularly at the start, I mean, they say some really racist stuff, and but it's you always read it knowing that that's not right, and that's how they've been brought up, and they're incredibly sheltered, but yet she still manages to write them so that they are sympathetic, and that's quite a skill, not one I think I could emulate, that's for sure.
No, I think it's probably worth flagging that Barbara Kingsolver did live in the Congo herself when she was young. So her parents I think her dad was a doctor. So they went out there and worked in like public health. So she, I think, was quite exposed to the concept of the mission and people coming in and doing this, which I think is where she can write it in this more sympathetic way, because she's seen it from both sides, basically. Because, yeah, I think her family were kind of really there, leaning into it and genuinely being helpful, rather than the Price family, who are there to convert all of these people to Christianity, who really don't need them there, and try to help them. And the Price family are trying to have absolutely none of it. And that's, challenging to read at times.
Yeah, I did wonder, there is a physician in there who has that interaction with the father, and I wondered if that was Barbara Kingsolver's father.
Oh, yes, he does, doesn't he?
So she was in Kinshasa, or in Leopoldville.
Ruth May breaks her arm, doesn't she? And they have to take her to the doctor.
And the physician and the preacher father have kind of a dialogue about the purpose of missionaries in the Congo, and the physician doesn't agree with them being there, and they have quite a tense scene. So I wondered, if that was something that... It's funny because it's not the kind of book that on paper I would generally read. It's sort of, I always feel a bit uncomfortable about reading, like, this kind of books from like Americans' the perspective of an American. But in this case, I really, really enjoyed it, and I think it's actually done incredibly sensitively, and it's very funny as well. Like, she is able to capture the absurdity of what's happening in this little village in the Congo, where it's a disastrous situation. This country has absolutely been ravaged by Belgium and ravaged by America. People are in a really desperate situation, and just the ridiculous irony of her father, this preacher guy, trying to convert them and trying to get them to read Bibles or whatever he wants them to do. And she just captures just the way that they kind of turn everything on its head, and they sort of take everything and infuriate him with how they won't do it quite correctly enough. And it's just, I thought it's so wry, and it's quite funny. I really liked especially the bit where they're trying to get, the Belgian government, I think, is trying to get them to vote or something. They're trying to teach them how to do elections the Belgian way. And so eventually they start, halfway through a sermon one day, they all get up and they say, "Oh, we're going to vote Jesus in because we've learned about elections." And then the father's infuriated by this. He's like, "You can't vote Jesus in. Yes or no, that's just not how it works." And they're like, "Oh, but you said elections are such a good idea, and according to you, Jesus is such a good idea. So we put them together," and it's hilarious. And they have this whole scene, and Jesus loses. So yeah, stuff like that. I thought it was fantastic.
It reminded me, and obviously this isn't a direct comparison, but have you seen the musical Book of Mormon?
I haven't, no.
I have.
But I know the concept.
Yeah, well, the concept's very similar in that the Mormons are sent to convert people to Mormonism, and it's that setting, isn't it, of these awful things going on in these people's lives, and then these really cheerful Mormons coming in and trying to convert them, and it obviously the tone is very different, but the concept's very similar. And it did remind me of that musical. I felt quite naive reading this. I'm not a religious person at all, so I mean, presumably, testing my knowledge here, the fact that it's split into 7 books is a reference to the Bible, right? You're going to realise how completely naive I am to even Christianity.
I think it's a vague reference to the Old Testament, but not completely, because there's more books than that in the Old Testament.
Okay, well, there you go. But, I enjoyed the fact that this made me want to read more around the subject, not necessarily Christianity, but like the political time period that they're in, and yeah, so I had to Google to see whether they were real or not, and obviously, yeah, they are. So I did feel a bit naive, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I definitely want to read more around it now. So yeah, I do feel like I got more out of this book, which just suits me a bit better, I think.
Good. I really liked and I don't know if you feel the same, that the locals were actually generally quite rounded characters. The ones that they focus in on, obviously, there's a few, like what's her name, Mama Tataba, and Anatoly, and Nelson, who are obviously they're kind of the three key locals, right? And I liked that they were all quite rounded and also quite funny and quite wry and quite experienced with these missionaries, right? They're not the Price family are not the first missionaries that this group have ever seen, and they're like, oh great, here we go again. And they try really hard to welcome them, and they try really hard to explain things. And when the family are having none of it, they're like, all right then, let's just let you go then and see what happens. And that's, I think, really interesting. And I liked the fact that they weren't kind of necessarily all put on pedestals as being right all the time, because there's definitely some things I think that happen where the locals aren't quite right or handle things in not a particularly brilliant way. But yeah, they're obviously generally better than the Price family are, right?
Yeah, I thought that actually the way that she handled that balance was really admirable, actually. I felt the book is sort of deeply self-aware in terms of her position as a writer and what she's trying to do, and it just feels so delicate the way that she unravels all of this. And a lot of the ways in which the missionaries are interacting with the locals, that kind of unfolds so slowly, because at the beginning you're really only hearing it from the missionaries' perspective, and they have no idea what's happening, and most of their complaints are about the fact that they don't have an oven and that kind of thing. And then as they're there for longer and longer, basically what happens is that all 5 of the characters become deeply entrenched in the Congo, especially the children. And as they're there for longer, it sort of is really carefully revealed how much the missionaries are actually a burden on the village, and how much the village are actually looking after them, with them having no idea that they were doing it. Like, for example, it's sort of revealed later, like many years later, like, oh, of course we were putting eggs under your chickens because your chickens were never going to lay enough eggs. And they were doing that for years and years, and they were like, but we knew that you're used to having such full bellies as Americans, so we had to help you, of course. And it's just incredible how these complicated dynamics that were happening without them being aware of it at all. I think she just unfolds this beautifully.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, it's just such a good book. It's such a well-rounded story, and I love the different directions the characters go in after the main events of the novel. So I feel like the first, 4 of the 7 books are very, very much linked to them as a family unit. And maybe I'm misremembering exactly some of the point points. And the later ones kind of go into their time after the mission and where they all go in their lives from there. And as you say, I love how connected they all are to their time living in the Belgian Congo and living in this village, but how differently they continue in their lives.
That bit was so unexpected, wasn't it? Well, maybe not for you, but I found it very unexpected, the way that I feel like when you start reading, you have this kind of idea of maybe of how it will unfold. Probably it will go badly. They'll all go back to the US. Wasn't that a terrible idea? And that's not. It's way more complicated than that. And the last third, actually, where you follow the 5 of them individually, is the most interesting. So it's really hard to talk about without spoilers, so we won't go into detail. But yeah, the way that they all choose to live their lives going forward is just, I found it really, really interesting. Especially, there's a lot of talk in there about homes away from home and that kind of thing. So obviously for me as an expat, it's just really interesting.
I'm really glad that you both liked this one.
I think it's a very good, if your book club likes long books or is willing to read longer books, I think it would be a brilliant book club book, because there's a lot to discuss in here.
Yeah, agree. It'd make a very good book club book.
Yeah, it really would. It really would. This isn't a spoiler, because right at the beginning of the book, it's clear that one of the children dies, and we're not going to say who it is, but I'm curious to know whether either of you were surprised when it became clear who it was, which one it was. If that question made any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. No, in the sense that I think that sister dying was the one that was going to have the greatest impact on the family. I think that was fairly obvious. So no, but I was surprised when it happened.
Okay, yeah, same. I'm dreadful at, like, you're very good, Alice, at noticing that things are hinted at and being like, oh yes, that was from earlier. I never noticed any of that stuff. So I think the first time I was like, wow, definitely didn't see it coming. I was surprised at how prepared she was to really, the author that is, just get into this really heavy story. I don't know. It's just not what I was expecting from the book at all. Maybe something about the cover. I thought it would just be this kind of like naff missionary story.
Do you really think a naff missionary story would have been one of my favourites?
Well, this is Alice. This is before when I read it
true.
a few years ago. That's what I remember when a few years ago I was like, wow, that was a story and a half. Not what I expected.
Big, complex, very well written. Would definitely recommend it to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. I would as well, obviously. Cool.
So thanks, Alice, for sharing those with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Hopefully, if you've read any of them, if you've got thoughts, if you've got opinions, if you agree or disagree, please let us know. I would be really intrigued to hear your thoughts on these books. So if you do have thoughts or opinions or perspectives you'd like to share on us, there are several ways you can get in touch with us. You can email us at thebookcastclub@outlook.com. On Twitter and Instagram, we are at bookcastclub. You can also leave us a message, which is a voice note that you can record and we will play in the podcast. There's a link to how you can do that in the show notes. Sign up for our newsletter, which has more reviews, new releases, podcast recommendations, and other updates on the podcast. And then if you've got thoughts, you can just hit reply on those emails and your thoughts will come straight to us. And of course, check out our Patreon. There are always links to that in our show notes. Thanks for reading my books, guys.
Thanks for sharing them. Really enjoyed them.
Good. I'm very glad.
I think next is Jen in a couple of months.
Oh gosh, who knows what she's going to pick.
Mine is short.
I was about to say earlier, Jen's suffering because she got horrible, sad books about grief from me, really long books from Alice, and Chris is going to make her read fantasy books. She's
he's going to make me read really long fantasy books.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, he is.
Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you guys in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.